Hey, everybody. Keith and Di are back. Two dads in a lab.
Thank you.
We are here to welcome back to the lab Wayne Boatwright. I would encourage you, if you haven't heard the first part of the episode, Wayne joined us last week or a couple of days ago. We're recording this to share his journey from San Quentin, an unfortunate accident, took a life, and we're now going to get further into that story with Wayne. Let's welcome Wayne back to the stage. Wayne, thanks for joining Keith and Di back here in the lab. Two dads trying to be 2% better. You left the last episode, and we ended off with Keith and Di encouraging people to, if you need help, to not be afraid to reach out. You're available, I'm available, Di's available. But Wayne, you left the app. If I can summarize episode 1, you found yourself working for Accenture. You found yourself in Korea in a culture that drinks, not a drinking fellow. You found yourself needing to fit in and be a part of society and do what everybody else, like we all do. And as a result, you, perhaps through peer pressures and the situations, you found yourself in a situation where you were behind a vehicle, you had too much to drink, and you unfortunately took someone's life. And that's how the last episode left. Should we pick it up from there?
Sure. The way I like to characterize it. Mm-hmm. So I believe that we live on multiple levels as an individual. So a great example is by an NYU professor named Jonathan Haidt. Jonathan Haidt says, there's the elephant and the rider. And that rider is your conscious self, your personality. Mm-hmm. But the elephant actually controls most of your life. You try directing an elephant, see how that works, right? And we get frustrated because we think we're in control. This rider's in control, but no, it's the elephant. And so I would say that my journey after my crime, as I sought mental health, professional help, and a myriad of different self-help groups inside San Quentin, which is a unique prison. In a lot of ways, it's famous, but it's unique because I think it's analogous to Silicon Valley. It's the creative epicenter of criminal justice reform. There are over 180 different groups, for example, who come into San Quentin and offer different meetings and organizations for the guys who are incarcerated. That is more groups than all the other 30 prisons in the California system combined go to San Quentin. And I took advantage of that because I had to figure out, I had to make sure this could never happen again. I had to understand how I could be that guy, how I could be this evil person that took a life and destroy 2 families in the process, right? You're not just destroying your victim's family. I destroyed my family. 6 months into my sentence, my wife of 14 years, mother of my 2 kids, asked me for a divorce. I destroyed 2 families, not to mention the impacts on our communities and society in general by my actions. And so I felt I had a responsibility to figure out why and what I could do to make sure that wouldn't happen again. And that journey is yes, we talk about reaching for help, but it's a solitary journey. It's your journey. It's you. You think you know who you are? In our time of abundance and our comfortable societies we live in, you don't know who you are. I'm going to be honest with you. You have to face something like that. You have to face, like I did last week. I went to Salt Lake City for a friend of mine whose wife of 35 years passed away from cancer. Now he's going to find out who he really is. Not that he wanted to. He's going to find out, and he'll either stay the same or he'll change, right? That's the choice we all get to make. I made the choice that I had to change fundamentally. And the way I characterize that is I burned down my psychic delusion house that I was living in, built by my religion and my education and my experiences and all that history stuff that we tell ourselves, the culture I grew up in. I burned the whole thing down. And so I decided I had to rebuild it myself. I wasn't going to be a follower of a religion. I wasn't just going to dance to the 12-step, if you know that reference. I had to figure out who I wanted to be, but I had to build a house that would make sure I could survive the challenges I faced and not use coping mechanisms like alcohol to hide, to be honest, from the traumas or the injuries that I was experiencing and wasn't willing to face. I learned to face those. And so I would say my journey after my crime and after I went to prison was to that journey of self-discovery and that journey of creation, of rebuilding my psychic delusion house, built upon a lot upon the groups I attended. I did victim offender dialogue, nonviolent communications, AA, NA, restorative justice. I did a lot of stuff. And I was lucky. By the way, I never disclosed I was a lawyer in San Quentin. I still got guys mad at me who got out, who said, "You were a lawyer? What? I thought I knew everything about you." I was like, "No, it's none of your business. I was a lawyer." But I was the managing editor when I was in San Quentin of the San Quentin News, which is a newspaper written by inmates, for the incarcerated, as our politically correct society likes to call it now. And so as the managing editor, I got to see a lot more about the restorative justice efforts in San Quentin, in the state system, in the national system, and even globally, of what people are trying to do to make sure that these guys can learn from what they've done. Because my philosophy of life, that orientation change that I talked about, is life doesn't happen to you. Life happens for you. And I'm not saying you wanted it to, but there's something that you needed to learn from that. And if you don't learn it, you're going to repeat the same thing, right? You're going to keep repeating that mistake. I know guys who've been married 5 times. They obviously haven't learned, right? In my opinion. So you're going to keep, hopefully, life will give you that opportunity to learn if you accept the invitation. And don't be a victim about it. Life doesn't happen to you. Life happens for you. What are you supposed to learn? And what tools do you need to actually learn it? And that's the difficult part, because we always focus on our rational mind, the rider, and we forget that the elephant does most of the stuff, right? You try telling an elephant what to do. And so the tools we need to develop aren't just your rational thinking mind. There are other tools. And so I've worked a lot of that space of the unconscious or subconscious facet of ourselves and how to interact with that. One way of interacting, by the way, is to use metaphors that are rich in retrieval cues, stuff you can visualize. That part of your existence, a visual entity, not a verbal entity, not a language entity per se. Elephant and a rider is something you can see. You need to use a lot of very rich metaphors like that if you're going to be able to communicate beyond your rational mind, because you've got to talk to the elephant. You got to know you're riding an elephant, and then you got to be able to talk to it if you ever want to get it to go somewhere it doesn't want to go. And so that's part of what I've learned. That's part of the journey that I've gone on. And again, that visual, I burned down my psychic delusion house. I decided to rebuild it on new philosophies, different, new to me. Trust me, I call it ancient Greeks and dead Englishmen. Those were most of the guys that I learned from, right? Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, right? Ancient Greeks. I even went pre-Socratic. I went before those guys and read what some of those Greeks said.
Yeah.
But I also looked at a lot of, I call them dead Englishmen, because there's a lot of great English philosophers that came out, and other European ones in the age of the Enlightenment. I found that they gave me a lot of insights into the human condition, into my condition, to help me rebuild my psychic delusion out.
Di, I know you were, I know you had something up for Wayne.
Yeah, Wayne, I'd love, and I appreciate just your vulnerability and sharing this with us, because I know it's not always an easy conversation to have, because it also can be quite triggering for some that might be dealing with this right now. We are dads here. We're fathers. That's something that unites us. And I know a lot of us are in this group in particular, with the exception, he's got a bonus child, someone that's under 10. But between the three of us, we also have early adults, young adult children. And I know right now, both of my kids are at university. And I know that they're experimenting. I know that they're trying things. I know there's the social pressure, the wanting to be accepted, wanting to hang out with the cool kids. And there is just a lot of pressures. And I'm curious in all this sort of shifting that you've gone through, and this sort of redesign and rediscovering what your purpose of life and this mission that you're on. Is there any sort of words of advice or encouragement that you can offer parents like us that maybe recognize that this is a real pressure for our kids? Like, how do we breach the conversation, and how do we have a healthy conversation around this? I'm just curious if that's something that you've explored with your own kids, or maybe in this journey that you've been on so far, that's been some of the content that maybe you've come up against or been discovering. Because in looking at some of the content that you've written on Medium, clearly there is a question around this, around how do we communicate this with kids?
Exactly. And yes, I have. I'm gonna promote something that hopefully you guys will put in the show notes when we're done. I'm on the board of an organization called Man to Man. And Man to Man was founded by an African-American retired sergeant of the Marine Corps, Presbyterian minister now. And he wanted to help educate men who had children. I won't call them fathers. Most of them never had a father themselves. So they don't have many of the tools that I think it takes to be an effective parent, an effective father. And so this organization really works at teaching these guys things like nonviolent communications, things like impulse control and dealing with domestic violence, things like how do you talk to your kids, right? I love Man to Man. I've been on the board since I got out. I would recommend anybody look at that site and a lot of the resources that are posted there. Currently, Stuart's got 2 groups in San Quentin, for example. He also teaches at jails and at junior colleges these concepts, because there's a lot of men out there who have an earnest desire to be better, to become fathers, right? To be true fathers to their children. And it's not easy, especially if you were raised in a single parent household and didn't have those role models to look upon. And so I've been lucky to be involved in that. To be honest, as a white man, I don't take center stage in that group. Most of the guys we're dealing with are minorities, and they've heard enough from the white man over the last couple 100 years. But if they seek me out as I speak or go to those, of course, I'll talk to them one-on-one about that. And so, yeah, these are issues that are, I think, relevant. We all have to use our own vocabulary and our own experiences if we want to connect. And so I'm not going to use very specific things, but I'll give you 2 of the tools that I've used with my children and also use with the guys that I work with, especially the young adults. The first one is meet them where they are. Meet them where they are. Don't try to drag them somewhere. Don't tell them where they should be. Meet them where they are first. And that includes their developmental level. If you're talking to, as I had to, my children were 5 and 7 when I committed my crime, and they were 6 and 8 when I went to prison. Developmentally, I had to meet them where they were to discuss my crime and the consequences of it, taking a life, having to serve sentence because society demanded that of me because I had breached society's rules. I can't explain those analytic, right, theoretical concepts to a 6 and 8 year old. I've got to talk to them. I have to meet them where they are in order to communicate with them at that level. And that, fortunately, unfortunately, I don't care if they physically are adults. Your brain doesn't actually finish maturing. We know all the neurobiology of this stuff now. You're in your late 20s before your brain gets to its high point of impulse control, right? So even if they look like they're adults at 20 and you think you can only use adult language with them, you have to meet them where they are. And that includes their developmental level, but also what they're interested in, what they care about. For example, when I was inside, my daughter loved the Harry Potter books, right? To meet her where she was, I had to go to the prison library, thankfully, had all the Harry Potter books. And yeah, I read them all. I read all the Harry Potter books. Because I had to meet her where she was. I had to show her how Harry feeling like an orphan was very similar to how she felt when she was abandoned by her dad, because that's how she processed it. I wasn't serving sentence as a good citizen is required to do. I was an evil guy who had abandoned her. And so she couldn't trust men anymore because I wasn't just her father, I was a man. The consequences of our crimes are so much deeper than we realize, our actions. And we have to realize that. I had wounded my daughter, and that's part of who she is. I wouldn't take that away from her. That's her journey. But I didn't want it to stay open. I wanted it to become a scar. You don't forget the scars. They're always there. But I don't want it to control her life if it stayed an open wound. So I had to work with her. But to do that, I had to meet her where she was. And then I could use the examples of the things she cared about to show similar happens in her life, in our experience, in the challenges we faced. My son wouldn't visit me for 18 months when I was inside, because when he transferred to a new school, his friends, the hierarchical pecking order that kids get in, they made fun of him when they found out his dad was in prison. Do you think his kids did a Google search on that? No, that's his parents. They're the ones that carry that weight.
Yeah.
But they told their kids, and then their kids made my son, he felt ashamed of his dad. He felt ashamed and a great sense of what he thought was anger. He didn't recognize it for what it was. He was because that was his developmental level. And just like when you're fishing, you got to let that line out. You can't try to reel him in or it'll snap. You could lose that connection. And for 18 months, he wouldn't come visit me in prison, but he did again. And for us, the way I was able to meet him where he was baseball, because he loves baseball. Varsity baseball player in high school. One of the highlights of my life since I've come home. Both my kids went to school back east in Connecticut, even though I live in San Francisco, and they were born and raised here in San Francisco. But when I got off parole, I was able to get on an airplane and go spend a week at my son's school and play baseball. This moment of my life, to see my son, a senior in high school, varsity baseball player, up on the pitching mound. Okay, he hit one batter when I was watching him, but still, he was pitching. And he played in the outfield, and he was hitting, and I got to cheer him on. And I found out another part of meeting them where they are is you have to do a little investigation work. So I had my son share his college admissions letters, the applications, the essays they have to write to get into college. And one of them was about baseball, and how important it was for me and him and how it connected us. And so I was able to use that tool. I was able to recognize his fascination with baseball. He was in Little League when I went to prison. I knew all this stuff. And so I used baseball and the language of it. And thank God he was raised at the time by his mother and his grandmother, neither of which had a clue about baseball. So he had basically nobody else to go to. I took advantage of that. In 1 week, the Giants, San Francisco Giants, are going to have their opening day at baseball. My son and I, he's going to be home on spring break. We're going to go to that game.
That's great.
This past summer, we went to 7 Giants games. Okay. I had to meet him where he was and where he still is. But one of the great things about baseball, it's a little slower than some of the other sports. You get a chance to talk.
Yes, absolutely.
Not just about the statistics. You get a chance to talk about anything. And I took full advantage of that. I will go to every baseball game I can possibly go to with my son. And so I met him where he was, right? And I think that piece of advice is one of the tools that we as fathers have the opportunity to use if we're willing to take advantage of it.
Yeah. So Wayne, I'm going to, so here's what I would like to propose. I would like to welcome you back to the lab at a future to continue this conversation. Admittedly, still having some audio challenges coming from your channel here. We're catching most of the words, but it's okay. Hey, I go live on purpose because real life is live.
It sure is.
Isn't that the truth?
This is real life. We're on stage with all the rawness in the world to display. But out of respect for time, I want to wrap up our conversation. And you know what? It's perfect to wrap it up because you gave the audience something to listen to. To hang on to. I gave myself. I can tell you a couple weeks ago when Di and I were talking about active fatherhood and active parenting, I myself was struggling, perhaps being vulnerable to meet my daughter where she was. And I had this conversation with Di on the air. So to hear you talking about meeting your kids where your kids are, man, that rings true to me, and a good reminder for me again, frankly, to meet my kids where they are. So thank you, Wayne, for that. Di, leave it to you.
You bet.
Wayne, I appreciate the vulnerability, but also your willingness is to share your story. I know we just barely scratched the surface of it, but I know there's some insightful tools that you've talked about, especially that man-to-man. And I'm curious, is it .com or .org? Man-to-man. Like, what's the website?
.org, yeah.
.org.
I'll send you the link because it's man-to-man by urban youth advocates. It's a complex thing. I'll send you the link. We'll put it in the show notes.
Great. I appreciate you also coming prepared to share some resources because I know many of us today, even though we're in this very well-connected internet, World Wide Web, it's amazing how under-resourced we still feel with challenges like this in life. And I really appreciate you coming to share that. but also just allowing us the opportunity to get raw and real, man.
Yeah.
Because that's what it's about in life. And I honestly feel that's where the real lessons are as well. It's just really immense gratitude for you being here today. So thank you.
100%. And Wayne, I would love to have you back, man. Seriously. Apparently, I create a couple hours of live content every single day. So I'm always looking for great conversations with interesting human beings to talk about interesting topics and share and help others. And I'm only suspecting, Di Manuel, we've just scratched the surface of Wayne Boatwright's story.
Did we ever?
And it's in the link, by the way. I put it in the chat. I put the man-to-man link in the chat for anybody who might be online or can access that. I want to make sure it's there.
I'm going to put it here on the screen so the audience can see this right now quickly before we say goodbye. There's -YUA.org. So men out there looking to talk, frankly, anybody. Hey, Di, man, woman, anybody, any human being. We are all about humans here. Two humans in a lab. Trying to be 2% better. We just happen to be dads. If you need some help, please, if you're hanging on to our words right now, don't be afraid to just reach out to somebody or myself or Di or even Wayne. Wayne Boatwright, we're going to wrap it up. Let's try to squeak out a final couple words from you and make sure the audio's working okay. Where can folks find you to connect with you? They can find you on LinkedIn and where else?
Yeah, LinkedIn's a great site to show where I promote a lot of the podcasts I do. I do a lot of podcasts these days, guys, but also either Medium or Substack. Even though most of those have a paywall, all of my stuff is free. I'm not going to make any money on this. I'm not trying to. Please, if you'll find a lot of stuff about there about suicide, about addiction, about parenting, about tough issues kids are facing today.
Yes.
Transgender issues, which are going on. I talk about all these things. My view of life is I refuse to know for certain what everybody else takes for granted. I'm always looking at things with new eyes, and I see the world a lot differently than you see on mass media, as most people do. And so hopefully there's some resources there that people will find of use, including a lot of authors that I've read and learned from, as the three of them I mentioned to you earlier on.
Awesome.
So that stuff will be there if they were willing to look at it either on Substack or on Medium. It's just my name. Just search on my name and you find it.
So Nation, 2% Nation, BAPL Nation, you'll be able to connect with Wayne through our Substack, through the inside.bapl.ai website there. We'll connect to Wayne as well. Listen, Nation, we'll make sure you get everything from Wayne that we've shared today. So Wayne, I'm just going to put you back in the green room for a quick second. Me and Di are going to say goodbye, and we'll come back and walk you out, okay? Hang tight, pal. Di, one more show in the books, my friend.
It was a deep one today. It was a little trip down memory lane for me, I got to admit. And I bet. I'm not a gambling guy, but if I was, I would totally bet that there's a lot of people in the audience today that probably needed to hear this, that may be feeling a little bit squirmy, a little cringy. Wayne was sharing some of his story, especially how he got to San Quentin.
Yes.
And my invitation to anybody, if you had a little bit of cringe there, a little bit of like, oh gosh, this brings back some memories, you're not alone. You're not alone. Like, it's okay. We can talk about this stuff. And Keith, I got to say thank you for holding the space, but also for bringing Wayne in today. This was just awesome.
It was great. It was great. I can remember when I had my last drink of the moment. Again, for being vulnerable, maybe there's somebody listening to this right now. I remember I was driving home with my new wife in the back of a taxi. I wasn't pretty, pal. It wasn't pretty. And that next morning I said to myself, that's it. It just, that's it. And I said, that was it. That was 7 years ago. Actually, no, 8 now. March 22nd. I think I'm coming up on 8.
No way, dude. Happy 8 years, man.
And it's not because and I know we're always trying to justify things. Not because there was a problem. It just wasn't fitting my lifestyle anymore. I like to be fit. I like to be active. I like to take care of myself and all facets of it. And that part was just getting in the way, frankly. And that was that awareness that I had to have. It was a kick in the face, right? And like you shared your story. So.
And I got to say, man, thanks for sharing that. I relate a lot to that. I knew I had a bad relationship with alcohol, and it ultimately just came down to making a decision. And what started as a 1-year commitment to not drink, it's turned into 15 plus years. Because a new lifestyle emerged. I was like so amazed at how good I felt. I was like, I don't want this to stop. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yes. All right, pal. Have yourself a great weekend. Dads out there, Keith and Di are heading out of here. I know Di's got to head to a meeting, and so do I. We'll drop this episode on our new Two Dads in a Lab channel. You find us on YouTube. We got the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Di, I think I'm going to start putting content out on beta and VHS and cassette and 8-track. So,
Dude, I'm glad you brought up 8-track. We're at least of the age that we remember those.
all right, 8-track and 2 dads in a lab trying to be 2% better. We're out of here. We'll see you guys next week.
See y'all.